What up? It's Nicky Chippy V here with hijack first button, single raise pot, 50 big blinds, playing the flop out of position. What is the number one thing I see from everyone here? They don't play aggressively enough out of position. They don't put enough money in the pot out of position for a variety of different sizes. Do sizes matter that much? No. Is it important for your poker mind to understand what size to play and why? Yes, because that's thinking about range versus range poker. All those important concepts like what am I targeting? What's my value range? This and that. So in this video, I've got a variety of different boards for you. We're going to focus on board identification. We're going to focus on what sizes we want to play and why. And we are going to try to shore up the big leak that I see from the population, which is this default to, I'm out of position in a single raise pot. I'll just play really passively and check a lot. Well, there's a few reasons why I hate that. Number one, it's only good if you have an in-position player that has proclivity to put money in the pot all the time and then figure it out. Maybe they, bet far too many degrees of hand strength and overfold to a check raise. Then we could start getting into that realm of, okay, I'm going to check to this guy because he bets way too much when I check to him. But as we're going to look at the situations, it's very difficult to find players that bet more when check to than the solver, right? The solver's pretty aggressive. It's pretty linear, does a lot of hard stuff. So generally my read is that people don't overstab when check to. There are a few specific reads we'll get into, one of which is that the in-position player probably doesn't slow play enough, but I don't think they overbluff or overvalue bet. So we want to get good at being aggressive out of position. Now, board identification and what's important. Like I said, we're going to be running like 50-50 with a slight advantage in terms of range versus range equity here. But certain boards, even though we have like 50% equity, when we're out of position, our return on that equity is quite bad. We under-realize. Our EV is lower on certain boards where we have similar equity with our range, but we just have to check fold a lot, right? So we're not going to say good boards and bad boards because our range is quite strong. I mean, thinking about the nature of, we'll look at pre-flop after in a minute, but think about the nature of 50 BBs, 40 BBs, even 60 out of position versus the button. The out of position player is going to have all the overpairs and all the big ace-X, right? And the button's going to 3-bet those at those depths. So there's going to be a lot of boards where we kind of have a hammer lock on the equity with our overpairs. And then there's going to be a lot of boards where we have to manage how we play our range because we under-realize quite a bit with some of our high cards and stuff like that. So even though it's 50-50 range versus range, we really want to figure out how do we play those equity distributions, something I always talk about when we're talking about flop mechanics. How do I manage my range? So we're going to see ourselves manage our range quite passively on boards that we perceive to be bad for us, and we should have a lot of aggression on boards that are good for us. So the only other question, like I said in the intro, is how do my opponents play versus check, and how do they play versus c-bet? That's the whole key to every single spot, right? It's just how do they respond versus this action, or how do they respond versus this action? If you get a player, like I said, that has some tendencies where checking is the clear exploit, okay, cool. Go ahead and simplify to check. But we're gonna see on these boards that I would argue that many players that are simplifying to just checking out of position, also they're simplifying to checking out of position, and then they're not good at check raising really aggressively for value and bluff. So if you think that you're doing something smart by simplifying and checking, and your opponent is playing at equilibrium and not over betting, and you're under check raising a little bit, you probably have some spots where you have an equity advantage, your range is supposed to make a lot of EV, and you're just not doing a good enough job. So I've got 4 boards today: ace queen 10 with a flush draw, 8-8-9 rainbow, 6-7-4 with a flush draw, and 10-8-6 with a flush draw. A lot of flush draws there. Nicky Chippy V, I guess we really wanted to see what those continues look like with the one flush card. Maybe find some hard bluffs, huh, boys? Maybe. So what's going on here? Ask yourself, before I flip into the solver land, if I'm hijack, we're only focusing on out of position in this video. If you look at these 4 boards, which one is the most aggressive? Which one's the least aggressive? Which one plays kind of globally? and which one is super, super passive, right? So I'm going to give you a spoiler. I chose these 4 boards because one of them is aggressive for only a tiny, tiny c-bet size out of position. One of them is super aggressive for a big size out of position. One of them barely bets ever and only checks. And one of them is very aggressive for our small c-bet size. Not the tiny, just the small. So ask yourself, are you confident in which board is checking the least, checking the most, which board has big size, which board has no big size, which board wants to bet one big blind all the time? Again, like all my other videos, if you're not confident in these answers, maybe you got to get back in the lab. All right, so the cornerstone of every post-flop spot is pre-flop. As boring as that is, and as much as we have looked at pre-flop for our whole life, still everyone forgets this is what post-flop strategies are built on. This is the cornerstone of everything, like I said. So all we got to do is pull up our whatever we're using for pre-flop, GTO Lab pre-flop here at 50, all equal stacks for this little study sesh. And we just want to look at what's the hijack got. Okay, he's starting off at that offsuit 10. So here we're going to do our classic mechanics. Identify the offsuit pip that the initial raiser opens. That's the offsuit 10, right? This is our first step in every post-flop spot, range imbalances. So where are the range imbalances here? Okay, well, we've got all the offsuit 10, offsuit 8, offsuit 9, that stuff. Obviously, we both have very similar combo use, but proportionally, when we open 28% and in position calls 16%, there's going to be some imbalances, and they're going to be driven by in positions nearly pure calls. So what is that? 2s through 7s, and then they start 3-betting 8s. But so for some players, this could be 2s through 9s, where they have way more of these as a proportion of their range. And then we're going to couple that with some of their offsuit combos. So they don't have as many offsuit 10s, they don't have an offsuit 9, so we can probably deduce that stuff with, 2 of their set cards that we like to call them, or obviously 3 of their set cards, that's probably pretty bad for us. Stuff with 2 of their set cards and a high offsuit combo, like Queen 4-3 or Queen 3 deuce, that's probably pretty passive for us. Like I said, not to say bad, we're running fine on those boards, but we want to start with checking. And then the opposite, some stuff that's smashing our high card stuff, and they have all these suited connectors low and suited hands and low pairs. If we ask ourselves, is this a board where I can target a low pair? We can probably bet a lot for a small size because they have a huge chunk of their range in there, right? So we always start with a little pre-flop warm-up there. Now let's get into the boards. Alrighty, Roo. Let's start with what I hope everyone guessed was the most passive board for OOP, right? It wouldn't, I think if you guys didn't choose the 764 as the most passive, then you got to hit the lab for a few sets of value bets, because this is just one of the boards that's pretty obvious, right? It's got 3 set cards. Again, our equity, if we look at OOP, we're 50-50. Which the whole spot across every single board, we have just above 50% equity across every single flop, and we're probably checking about 60% of the time across every single flop. So think about that as a global metric, and now look at what we're doing here. We're checking 80. We're using medium and big size. I don't really care. This is one where we can simplify. But what we're going to see, and in this video I'm not going to get into in-position betting because that's the next video, but we're going to have to throw some in-position bets out to see our OOP strats. So pretty easy in this one. I just want to kind of explain, where do I go to see if I really want to check this much, and what does my range, the distribution of my range look like? Well, it makes sense that we're just checking a bunch because we have 50-50 equity and we have a ton of middling equity. It's not one of those spots where we have a polarized distribution, right? So we're going to have our overpairs around 70. We're going to have our obviously our big pairs are a little bit more. So our vulnerable sort of middle of our range overpairs are 70-ish. And then we have a bunch of these like 1 pair hands or ace high with a backdoor, or just a good ace high like ace queen at our global equity point. So makes sense that we're starting off with a check, right? A lot of our C-bets, if we wanted to build some light C-bets, they would have pretty bad removal for nuking money into the pot with high cards, right? Because that's what imposition is going to fold. So if we go back to our strats, every decision like this, it doesn't matter what we're looking at right now. Yes, we want to learn to check. We want to see what the responses are versus what we do. So if we check, 50-50 in hijack button for the in-position player is a pretty solid metric unless it's an extreme board situation, right? So here, low part of the deck, again, we'll get an in-position strats later, but are our opponents betting half the time? Do they just stab the ace, queen, ace, jack, ace 10, king 10, king jack, king queen all the time, queen jack? Are they betting this light for value? Like, do they bet pocket twos? You know, are they doing a good job of all this other suited stuff? It's hard to say. I feel like, you know, in almost every spot, like we always talk about, what's the main leak? It's just people just aren't aggressive enough. It's just difficult to be aggressive enough in this game. So let's see, what do they do versus bet if we bet small? Now, the continues aren't very difficult, right? They can just have like a front door diamond with their broadways. I don't think anyone folds these. Ace 10, no diamond, continues versus B30. I ran this one for B15, B30, and B60 OOP. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that hard to continue ace high. I don't think it's that hard to continue diamonds. I don't think it's that hard to continue backdoors. Maybe every king 9 is the hardest continue here, maybe. But you probably don't get raised 14%, right? So that's in favor of being able to probably value bet for a little bit of protection linearly and not get punished. Now, what did I say about why simplifications could be costly if you're not good at the next node? Check. Now, ask yourself before we look at the spoilers, when I check here, if I'm somebody that just pure checks all the time instead of betting, what do I check raise? What are my bluffs? What are my value? How often am I doing it? It's just like all of our other spots, we're going to have our categories of bluffs, right? We're going to have diamonds, we're going to have backdoors, we're going to have single diamond for the savagery, and we have a tighter range to pull from, so it's not going to be as hard to figure out what to bluff with. But are you check raising 20% here? Every pocket pair that on 7-6-4 at 50 is check raising, right? And this is a stack depth that we play all the time. So we have, again, if we go to categories, we've got immediate equity, diamond draws, backdoor hearts, like queen 9 of hearts, king 9 of hearts, right? Obviously the 8 is easy. You just get to check raise an 8 on a 7-6-4. That's your gutter type stuff. That's fine. Flush draws are fine. You have kind of normal mechanics going on where you're going to just not raise the ones that don't really clear out too much stuff, the ones that are just too good, right? So you're check calling all of your ace 9 plus nut flush draw, your big king X, sure. Are you this aggressive with queen jack of diamonds here? Or are you not check raising enough? If you have a player that's reasonable at betting, this is how we want to play, right? So we saw most of our opponents are probably going to put money in half the time. If we have a guy that's putting in a little bit too much, sure, maybe we can check raise more. But the thing is, it's a nice thing to say, oh, I simplified check, and then, you know, that's an easier way for me to play my range. But I think most people that play like that, they just check call too much after they check. So then you'd rather just bet yourself. But if you're going to check, just make sure, and you should check this board because we didn't see any clear exploits from c-betting too often. It's not that hard to continue for in position. If you have somebody that's folding queen of diamonds jack, then yeah, sure, but that's not really many players that we're trying to train to play against. So here, make sure you hit the check raise. That's the biggest part about this one. You can check, hit the check raise, look at your categories. Some of it's pretty obvious. And like I said, like you don't need, it's not like playing from the big blind, you have to dig through all these offsuit combos. You're just going to have your worst broadways with a diamond and check raise those the most and check call your best ones. You got to add a little ace king in there, but for the most part, I would say probably the high card aggression is what people don't do. The rest of this stuff is not that difficult. Take a good look at this range for a second and just tell yourself, I probably got to get a little bit better at check raising in this spot. Let's go to our second most passive board. Now, we're going to use all those same pre-flop rules to figure out why is this board passive but not 80% like 7-6-4. Well, it's 10-8-6 with a flush draw, and our in position player has those sixes pure. He started to 3-bet 8s, and he 3-bets 10s a good chunk. We have that offsuit 10 that he doesn't flat with as much because he's 3-betting ace 10 off, he's folding jack 10 off and queen 10 off a lot. So this is a board where we actually have a pretty decent equity advantage. And also, if you notice, the last board on that 7-6-4 when we're 50-50-ish, our EV in a 700 chip pot, 7 big blind pot, is it was 3 big blinds, right? So we're not really getting a good return on that 50% equity because we just don't get to show it down. Now we're getting, our EV is getting a little bit more in line with our equity. Our return on our equity is better, and we're winning about 3.3 big blinds. Now, we're allowed to be more aggressive here. This board, so we start with a really passive board, about 80% check. The boards that are more passive than that, like I didn't even mess with in this one, is like, sure, 5-4-3 all spades, pure check. Monotone is pretty easy to pure check out of position. I didn't feel it necessary to put in this video. So now we're at more of a global checking frequency, right? Like our whole range, across all the boards, we're gonna check 60. Here we check 65. So what's going on here, and what do I want to do? Well, again, I think that most players are not good at being aggressive here. They're not good at putting in money. They're not good at bluffing, and they're definitely not good at betting big or medium with ace king, ace queen, maybe not even ace jack. So it's very, very easy to get in a pattern where you're far too passive on all these boards, right? We have a lot of 10x to value bet. We have our overpairs to value bet. We can go B30 or B60. Like I said, of these 4 boards, we have a board that never bet. Now we have a board that bets about globally for our medium size, B30. And then the other 2 are going to be examples of a board that bets huge all the time and a board that bets tiny all the time. So this is our example of a board that plays globally, bets medium size. It makes sense that we don't have to go huge here because we have this 10x. It's not that fun to try to build a range that just bombs overpairs. The board can change, especially when we get deeper. We don't really want to have that big size. So this is what our c-bet strategy looks like, and do we want to change it? Well, it depends how our opponent responds to c-bet. Same thing, flush draw boards. He just has to call backdoors and, his 1 spade hands. Ace, queen, ace, jack are already in difference points, and he has to do a good job of making sure that he continues with his pocket pairs with a spade until he starts to beat some value bets with, pocket 7s, and that's kind of it. Now, as far as in position goes for raising, we're going to talk about that in the raising video, but there's not too much tough stuff going on here. There's some linear value. Are we getting raised 18%? Like I said, usually the answer is just no, right? That's kind of poker. So as things evolve, as we can see in our study, and I'm sure if you've watched, other coaches or talked to your buddies about poker, the thing we want to understand is how do I get to these aggression metrics? Because aggression is what wins, right? You're not going to be the best player by being super tight and passive and tricky all the time. You need to be aggressive to win the most money. So that's what the point of this is understanding how to be as aggressive as you can be out of position within the guidelines of the solutions and what makes sense at equilibrium. So here, is there anything to exploit by c-betting too wide? Probably not. Is anyone c-betting too wide here? Probably not, because it's it's a board where I think people mostly check. It looks kind of like it hits the button and it's a little bit connected, right? So just understanding here that we're going to take our Broadway with a spade, super easy, Broadway with a spade, all that stuff. Some of our low pocket pairs with a spade, and most of the stuff's pretty intuitive, right? 7x is easy, 9x is easy, flush draws and backdoors are relatively easy, not going bombs away with low cards when most of in positions folds are low pocket pairs as we see in the same hands, right? So when we look at all the hands that are the most passive, they typically mirror the folding range. So yeah, all that good stuff, right? Now again, if we play this heavy check, we don't just want to look at a c-betting range. we need to look at what we do when in position bets. And it's another board where, again, if we keep paying attention to all these little globals I say throughout the course, I'm just like, 50-50 is a pretty damn good one to remember. It's applying to continuing in position on turn barrels. It's applying to continue out of position on turns after you check raise. It's applying to when out of position checks to me, I bet half pot. I put in money half the time, not bet half pot. So all these little numbers keep popping up in this game. It's not a coincidence, right? Like, it kind of makes some sense, right? So let's just remember that one too. Are people hitting this 50 metric, this number of putting in money half the time? I would say what does not happen. People don't start betting ace queen enough, ace jack enough, probably not even king queen enough. King queen with no spade is even more aggressive than king queen with a spade, because king queen with a spade can continue on more turns and has a little bit of an easier time on the check line. Other things that are happening, starting to play some bluffs with the low pocket pairs, understanding the rest of your range is pretty high up, so as high cards roll off, we're going to use those, but again, in position is a different lesson. So when we face that, again, it's a heavy check raise. These are over 10% check raises. This one's 14. We have ace nine, pretty intuitive bluff, right? Okay, so let's look for some hard bluffs. We just have our gutters. We want to use a big size on this board because in position has those high cards that we just don't really target. If we think about check raise sizes, I don't want to play two check raise sizes in game, right? That's not why we test for two sizes. I just test for two sizes so that we know when we see the solve which one we like. So now here, when we have an in-position player that can have a bunch of pairs with a spade or two overcards, there's interaction between offsuit broadways and 10 high boards. You just want to remember, what are his offsuit hands that could potentially continue versus the small size? That's going to be some king, queen, king, jack, ace, queen, even the pocket pairs with a spade can. And then when we go our big check raise size, we get all those hands out of there much more. That's the idea that I always say, what am I targeting? But if we zone in our check raise a little bit more, just remember our categories, right? Okay, flush draws, and sometimes here we have a mega flush draw, right? Queen, jack of spades. Easy, category one, check raise a bunch. Again, the lower cards are less aggressive because that's where in position pulls folds from a lot, right? So that's an important one to remember. It's easy to get the blinders on, and with these little mechanics, just take these for, you can use them in every spot. So I don't mean to get too granular with, oh, the solver does this, the solver does that, but it's important to think about poker this way if you want to get better. So it's like every other video I make about Chippy V, where I'm just saying, like, I mean, it implies everywhere, where it's just like, what are they betting a lot and what are they going to fold, and do my cards interact with that? Like, so if all these folds are coming from the in positions aggression with like twos, threes, fours, fives with a spade and some of their low stuff, we probably don't want to have too much nut flush draw on the check raise line that have those cards when that's where he's generating the folds. So regardless of specifics, just remember how important it is to understand where folds come from and don't have those cards when you're trying to bluff. Now, what are we having to just provide bluffs later on? These are pretty easy because it's not like we're having a 30% check raise. So we just have some ace nine with a spade. We have some ace jack with the spade because that's going to clear out some ace queen. And then we've got the straight draws. So this spot, not very difficult for the check raise. Now we're going to get to a really goofy one. I didn't want to bore you guys with a bunch of different solves, a bunch of different tests, and this and that. But I do want to say that in different solvers with the slightly different parameters, slightly different pre-flop configurations, or whatever it is, I've seen this board at this stack depth in GTO Wizard play, nearly pure check. I've seen it when you add this tiny bet, it plays this much bet. I've seen GTO Wizard AI play this strategy, GTO Wizard pre-solve play pure check. I've seen stuff in my own library play a really heavy check. So it's super sensitive to how tight or loose the pre-flop strategy, the in position call is, and it's super sensitive to what sizes you give it. But all that aside, let's just look at this one and see that it wants to play it never wants to go big into this in position flatting range. It's just choosing a size, and it's our highest equity board of the four, our highest EV board of the four, because we don't struggle to get that return on our equity. And it's the one that wants to use this tiny size. And why? Because when we think about cold call pot mechanics, we're thinking, what am I targeting? What can one big blind target here? Low suited connectors and pocket pairs, right? So it's as simple as that. Ask yourself, what can I target here? I can target 3s, 4s, 5s, 7, 8 suited, of course. And I haven't, versus this range, if I bet this tiny, look at this, like, I don't want to bring up the equity graph every time, but look at all of our yellow and green here. We have a really high equity situation where it's a very spread out, evenly distributed equity map where we have a lot of our hands in the middle. We obviously have super nutty hands, of course, but our worst hands are our pocket pairs and our irrelevant suited connectors. But we have so many medium and strong hands that, even something like the 10x in there at, over 50, we put this in, we're getting, little calls. And in position players, again, they're going to have to find a way to raise this small bet a lot because they have some nutty hands in this board. Are we getting raised 22%? Same answer as always, probably not. So does this bet overperform? Probably yeah. Can I do it with a bunch of different stuff and get information on my opponents when they might be confused, or they might show a reaction that they were expecting a bigger bet and it might be obvious that they're calling in the middle of their range? Yeah, that's why I like betting one big blind bets in live poker for sure, is you usually tend to get a little bit more information. People tend to get itchy and fast play the nuts and not bluff as often versus the one big blind, so you get more fast plays and then you get a little bit more visibility on a range. So I really like a play like this for a bunch of different reasons. Now, what happens if we check? So this is a case of a board, and I said, okay, that in position metric is, pretty solid to put in money half the time. Obviously not on one of the worst boards for you in the deck, in the position pair where out of position has a ton of, 55% equity. So the in position player now, the other thing that this is going to illustrate that's also part of the in position lesson, but I'll just say it now, is you can see this is all big betting, so the frequency is going to go down. And the question that the in position player had to ask himself is, am I playing linear or polar, and what am I trying to accomplish with my bet? So here he's playing pretty polar and he's not betting very often, so he goes into the big size because he just has some really strong hands and a lot of weaker hands and bluffs, and we have a lot of middling hands. Versus big bet, not going to be a very interesting spot because we're not going to raise. So all we have to do to cover the out of position after checking on this one is to make sure we're not going to make any bad folds. So are you folding 10-8 of spades? No. I'm just going to highlight all of the stuff that's not obvious, right? You can check call your low flush draws. That might be one of the harder plays, but you could have bet them a lot anyway. And you don't have to call any pocket pairs really. These are all indifferent. People probably don't hit enough betting, they don't big bet enough with complete air or random low pairs, I don't think. So yes, this is a very easy strategy versus big bet, not something that we even have to spend a ton of time on. The fact that ace 8 and ace 9 off are indifferent is notable, and if you have no spade, it's a pure fold. That's probably the biggest thing here, is that you can check and face B60 in position, B70 in position, and you can just fold right away with ace 8, ace 9, no backdoor. Same thing for ace 3, ace 4, no backdoor. All right, so let's finish up this OP session with our most aggressive board. Did anyone win the contest where we said 8-8-9 is our most aggressive board? Our highest EV board, we bet big 74% of the time and we only check 26. Why? It's pretty easy range and balance stuff, right? We have ace 8, we have ace 9, we have every overpair, and the way I see these like paired boards for the in position player, when they don't have as many overpairs, if we look here at how much our overpairs are worth, 76+% equity. So we've got a situation where we really don't have many bad hands because all of our offsuit hands have 2 overs and some backdoor straight potential. Our pocket pairs have strong equity on a paired board here. And in position doesn't have any offsuit trips. And it's kind of a bricky board or the way I would think about it, especially when the paired board gets lower, is nothing really changed. Not that much stuff changed from pre-flop. I have a stranglehold on the overpair advantage. I have a stranglehold on the offsuit trips advantage. I have a stranglehold on the offsuit top pair advantage. Hammer away, big bets. Also, we're seeing big bets. What am I targeting? Well, it's probably pretty hard to target a range that has offsuit broadways, suited connectors, and pairs in most of the calls on a 9-8 high rainbow board, because you're not going to target any of that stuff with a small bet there. You're going to get like no folds from the range, right? Obviously, it's a little fake when we do a zero reach action, but it's still instructive to see how little folds you get and visualize the range. Now, when we go big, get ace 10, king 10, the king high indifference points, pure folding. The backdoors making folds, the low pairs folds, and we force continues because he's only allowed to fold. He can't just start folding 50% of his range. So we're going to start hammering money in versus his overpairs, his pairs that he has. We got the advantage. All good. That one's easy. These low pair boards eat more really aggressive for big size. You just think about them as bricks and hammer away. If we do check, now we were supposed to be so aggressive. Now the in position player is just going to try to target, our real air that we didn't bet. So again, that 50-50 shifting upwards here when we were supposed to be so aggressive and we didn't. We missed that bet. And here's where, again, we're going to see us springing a really aggressive check raise strategy. I would argue, again, we're not that good at this, guys, like myself included. I always got to remind myself how to be aggressive, right? So it's not that crazy that you have to pull all these bluffs from different places, right? Like, what's the hardest bluff here? Like ace 7 backdoor or something like that? Pretty much. Ace 7 no backdoor. Ace 6 no backdoor, king 7. So those are our toughest ones to give us some bluffs on those runouts where our 6-7 hits. Otherwise, it's just kind of making sure that we're not too passive with obvious equity. We do want to, if we slow play, we do want to have check raises for value. So we have to have some of this stuff like, again, the hard stuff to hit, ace 10, ace jack, ace queen. But mostly obvious stuff, but hitting that 20% is tough, right? So what are the main takeaways here? Evaluate where your opponent will be weaker, because you obviously, as out of position player on a variety of different boards, all your strategies are going to be quite mixed in terms of checking and betting, and they're going to be equal EV. But generally, if you just start checking all the time to simplify, and then you don't do a good job of check raising, now it's not the same. Now you're making a mistake. You're compounding later on. You're playing a weaker strategy. You're letting players get away with too much linear betting in position. Maybe they shut you out of some equity and stuff like that later in the hand. So we just want to get good at being aggressive enough as out of position, either by betting ourselves or by check raising. We want to understand generally which boards, which sizes match up with. We don't have to play multiple sizes on any board. As you can see, all these boards had only one size. That was the point of this video, is to do your board identification and then play the size that you think makes sense there. You don't have to play a million sizes all the time. But let's just make sure we're being aggressive enough, whether we start with a check or whether we start with a bet, and think about which one is better versus different player types, right? So the player types that overstab, have sizing tells, sure, check out a position. If you've got Tony Baloney in position and you're like, every time he B80s, he's bluffing, and every time he B33s, he has the nuts, sounds good. Or vice versa, you got Old Man Coffee, he B80s, he always has it, or he checks, sure, check, and then when he checks, you can take advantage of him on the where we're going to go on another video on this topic, which is the check line ripe for exploit. So if you have that kind of information on a really weak player, do whatever you want. If you think they're going to be too tight versus c-bet, just c-bet your air, check your value. But if you want to be balanced and understand how to get enough money in the pot, play this way that we just talked about. All right, guys, we're continuing with hijack versus button, cold call pots, and I just want to hammer home some of these in position flop mechanics and turn mechanics so that you're starting the hand with the right amount of aggression and with the right combos so that you can make the best decisions later in the hand versus a variety of different opponents having all of the different bluffs and value bets available to you. So let's just go through quickly. I know I touched on this some of these spots for the in position when we were talking about the out of position player check raising, but let's just hammer home the flop mechanics here. What does it mean when our out of position player misses a c-bet? That's a big question to ask ourselves when we're playing this button spot when check to 50 BBs hijack versus button, right? So on a board like 7-6-4, what does it mean? It means they still have everything. So what am I going to ask myself? If they still have all of their strong hands, but they still have all of their auto folds like Jack 10 of spades or whatever else, right? And I want to value bet very wide linearly for protection and for value. I'm going to have a small size, right? So on a 7-6-4, there's no need for us to size up yet when check to, because we don't want to rifle a ton of money into his overpairs and all his strong hands when he checked 80% of his range. And it's not very difficult for us to target the high card portion of his range, right? So if we ask ourselves one of our simple questions, what am I targeting? Here, you're just targeting a bunch of high cards, right? So your bet size is going to be small and your frequency is going to be high. It's a good board for you. It's a good equity board for you. It's a good EV board for you. You can be linear. You can bet really aggressively for value and protection, like I said. And where do you find your hardest stuff? It's not even that hard on these boards, right? You're going to pull broadways with a diamond and broadways without. It's okay. You can use without. Now, the good rule here that I'm sure a lot of you guys already know is pretty simple. You bet your worst broadways the most because they clear out the broadways that dominate them, right? So we see Jack 10, King 10 betting more than King Jack betting more than King Queen Jack betting more than both of them, because when we make that small bet, we're always thinking about, what do I fold out that dominates me? What is my hand accomplishing, right? So for here, we're going to fold out some King Queen, King Jack, King 10, Queen 10. That's a big win for our worst broadways. So really easy, if you're new to this concept, it's a really easy rule to remember. I can bet my worst broadways the most often, and that's going to go very well for me. It doesn't necessarily apply the same way with ace-x, because sometimes you see ace-queen betting here. That's more of like a value bet. That's also a very difficult play on this left side of the grid that you should pay attention to. On 7-6-4 with two diamonds, we're just ready to bet a variety of different ace-queens for value and get a little bit of clearance. It's not a bad thing when ace-queen makes Jack 10 fold. It's also not a bad thing when ace-queen makes another worse high. Ace-high continue, as we can see. Ace-9, ace-10, ace-jack, right? So some of these high card plays are something we want to focus on, because when we're seeing this idea of, like I said, if it's not an extreme board for us, it's not obvious that it's a bad board for us. This one's actually good for us, but in this subset that we're just four boards that we're working with, we know that ace queen 10 is really the example of a board where out of position has a lot more equity and a lot more nutty hands than us. That type of board is an example of a board where we won't do this sort of linear, super aggressive strategy, and hit 50, whatever, 60% putting money in. When it checks to us on one of these good low boards, even when they check all their strong hands, we can put money in half the time or more. We can use all of our rules about, okay, what did he check? What am I targeting? What is my hand accomplishing by betting? And then otherwise, like our categories of bluffs here are easy, right? We have flush draws, we have 8x, and then our harder stuff is like the queen jack off, maybe jack 10 off for the clearance, maybe ace queen, doing a little bit of two-way like protection, getting a little bit of value, not necessarily building it for a bluffing range. And always here the magic low pocket pairs, the pocket twos, obviously threes here has a little bit of additional equity, but this is how you're going to build your range so that you actually have bluffs on your most aggressive turns, right? So if we just go to on the bet call line, and let's put down a deuce, but then let's have OOB check. Now we're going to have a nice sort of that 50-50 number we look at, but it's this one, is a little bit more like 55 that we're putting money in. And we can put money in for medium size mostly. If we're going to play B33, B66, or pot, it looks like we would like to play mostly B66. So this looks like another one where we can go, I'm going to put money in about half the time for an average bet size of, let's say, B50, right? And some of the most aggressive turn cards are the low ones, of course, because that's going to miss out of positions check call range. And what are we going to use on the more aggressive cards, right? So like a deuce that we're playing, significantly less check than a high card. We're still going to keep barreling that queen of diamonds jack type hand. Our queen jack off with no diamond is now giving up. It has really bad removal versus the folding range, right? Because they might have called something like a backdoor heart hand or just ace queen off or whatever, or king of diamonds queen. So now we really need to have the queen of diamonds jack instead of the other one to continue bluffing, fold out all those hands that dominate us, all of our normal rules. So our hardest to find bluffs are going to be the single diamond savagery there with king jack, queen jack, every king 10 just trying to make out of position fold, and also what is king's 10's property? Okay, we have equity with 10-9, equity bluffs with 10-9. Those straight draws are going to hit. So on an 8, we can probably use king 10. So we're going to see some of that stuff happening as well. All of our normal rules applying as long as we set ourselves up to have the right hands on the turn to put this strategy in play, right? Now let's look at another texture that is a little bit similar in terms of a heavy check for out of position and a little bit better equity for out of position, but we will still use this half the time putting in money for small. This is what I want you to remember about this spot. You are allowed to bet a lot unless the board is extreme. We will get to an extreme board in a minute where we don't have enough equity with our range to employ the strategy where we want to bet small for linear value and protection so often. But we can have a lot of betting here. You can see that we have, 7s betting, 9s betting, all of our 10x. Same offsuit rules here are going. We're setting ourselves up to have a bunch of different bluffs with our offsuit broadways. You have to think about these spots and single raise spots as the flatter, the in position flatter. If you're trying to hit like putting in money 50% of the time, you probably need to be pretty aggressive with your offsuit broadways and your offsuit ace-x that you have. That's something you're seeing in all these spots, right? So we really want to make sure that we're understanding how to bet ace queen, ace jack, king queen. The other thing about these spots, like we've said, like we talked about with the out of position check raise in the other video, is that we're not getting check raised as much by the out of position player as we should be, right? So all of these bets are overperforming as they just continue to get more folds than they should and face less resistance than they should. That's why I think this is an important spot to study. It's an important spot to study from both positions to understand where the overfolds come from or the under check raise comes from, right? Now, the categories of bluffs on 10-8-6 are, again, easy, right? Like, we don't need to do crazy stuff. We have 9x for gutters. We have 7x for gutters. We have our one spade hands, some of our offsuit broadways that just want to clear out other stuff. And when we look at what we do clear out with a bet from out of position, it is even on this board when something like ace king and ace queen are so weak, we do a lot more clearance. That's why we're seeing stuff like random king queen no spade betting more often. So ask yourself, what are the indifference points? What am I targeting? That's going to help you choose your hand selection, right? So here we can see again another, it's 14% check raise. Not super hard, but typically, like we said yesterday, like we said in the other video, typically it's just going to be less, right? Like, it's just going to be less ace 7, it's going to be less king 7, it's going to be less king 9. So all this different stuff, it's just going to be less versus most players. So I keep saying that, right? So clearly that's probably a population league. So don't be the player that is check raising less than they should. You can punish people with that strategy, but this is about in position. So when we build that nice betting range based on all of our normal rules and heuristics, let's put up every turn card in the deck. I know this stuff is grindy. We're grinding through this stuff. We need to learn this stuff though. Or if you already know it, you can shut the video off. But somebody's got to learn it. I'm still learning all this stuff. So here, again, we see these numbers happening all the time. They're very helpful in these 40 to 50 big blind range c-bet pots or single raise pots. We're seeing these numbers where a lot of times we get to put in money with half our range. It's pretty nice. It's a pretty easy way to play poker. And a lot of times those bet sizes are coming in the middle of our bet sizing, right? So we're coming in at like B50 or B66. Obviously, we're going to have on this one where we have some offsuit top pair out of position would have check raised a lot of over pairs. We get to play some big sizes with, 10x on low cards. Our high cards are going to be more in that smaller size, not potting it. But let's just look at some really aggressive cards for us. And that's going to be because where do we draw bluffs from and clear out of position's hands, right? That's going to be more high cards because as we saw on the flop, when out of position folds, they actually fold a lot of high cards on a board like 10-8-6. So as you can see in all of our Chippy V videos, it's all about tracking what do they have, what do they fold, what am I targeting, right? So now they folded all their high cards. So that means that high cards are actually really good for us to be barreling, right? Especially high cards without that spade. So now we've got we would have started with some 2s with a spade, 3s with a spade. Now, using those on the flop, if we go back, sorry to jump around, we're going to want, of course, a lot of these pocket pairs in a betting line for protection and to clear out hands. And then we're going to use them on different turn cards in different ways. So when we get a big turn card, we're going to be really aggressive. Now we're going to use 3s without the spade and use that for a bluff, 2s without the spade and use that for a bluff. And because we're going to go into a medium big size here and out of position is going to have some of those hands that all of his folds are coming from those pocket pairs because again, if we jump back to what he calls with, he just calls with the spade, right? So I don't mean to be annoying with the little mechanics, but you got to think about this stuff. You got to think about, okay, he's going to call 3s with a spade. Now I got to turn it down on the turn. Turn down my aggression with a hand like that on the turn. So some of our more aggressive cards here, as we can see, if we started with the right stuff, we have pretty easy bluffs here, except for switching to having some of these, every pocket 2s, understanding the 3s mechanic, giving up with 4s. That stuff is hard. But we do know that we always want to track where folds are coming from, and that's important. So here, reason why we start with high cards similar to check raising flops or anything else like that, we want to have stuff for high card turns, right? So that's now we're going to fill out our aggression with stuff like king jack, ace jack, right? Even ace nine. We're going to get a little bit more passive with our low cards. So I know this stuff is super grindy, but you can see the pattern starter. They present themselves in every single spot. It doesn't matter if it's a 3-bet pot. It doesn't matter if it's hijack versus button, button versus big blind. It's always, every time you figure out how to use your cards, it's always about what did they call with and what are they going to fold. And if I start with a bunch of stuff all over the place, I have a really easy time figuring out where my bluffs are. So now, you could make the mistake of thinking, I'm supposed to rifle it off with pocket fours if you don't think about where the folds come from. You could make the mistake of not having enough high cards if you didn't bet, and not having enough value if you didn't bet king, queen, ace jack, king jack on the flop enough. You don't have enough stuff prepared for high cards, right? So it's all the same ideas. It just shifts with the way the ranges are interacting, right? Okay, let's look at the last two here where they're actually pretty bad flops for us, but out of position misses a c-bet. Now, this is when out of position is playing this tiny c-bet, so you might have some players that aren't playing that way. They might pure check this flop, whatever the case may be. Everything is mixed, so obviously the EVs are the same. Let's just see what happens when we miss check here, when we miss c-bet on the ace queen 10. So this is the first spot we've seen where in position wants to have a big size and lower that frequency. We're not seeing that around 50-50 metric. The question, like I said, we're asking ourselves as the in position player in these cold call pots is, am I being linear for value or polar? And we know I hate, throwing those terms around, but it is the best way to describe it. And it just means, am I just betting my good hands and my best bluffs, or am I betting a bunch of different kinds of stuff? So here, obviously, we're betting our good hands and bluffs. And this is going to be a spot where we actually start pulling pretty frequently from our low pocket pairs, and they really do want to have that flush card. So we start bluffing with low pocket pairs here with a spade, because that's going to be our bluff on spade runouts, and also we're going to utilize them on some straight runouts too. It just happens to be the case that the way this range is built, we're tight enough where we don't really have the luxury of having offsuit bluffs that have a flush blocker when the board is ace queen 10. So we want to start with some of those, and obviously the twos being most aggressive, because one of our rules too is, how aggressive should I be with my pocket pairs? Well, can I fold out pocket pairs that dominate me if I check? So that's why you see twos escalating all the way to fives, where then sixes kind of cools off, and then sevens is checking, trying to maybe show down or just not start betting quite yet, because it beats some other stuff. So then the other things that are obvious, right? We have king X, gutter with the straight blocker. We have jack X. So this is not really difficult, and you're not going to be betting a lot when your equity is so much lower than the other boards. Like I said, typically this spot is playing around 50-50 with OOP having a little bit of an edge. And then this is a pretty rare spot where OOP has 56% equity. So you got to respect it with a low betting frequency, polarize your range. You don't have protection bets. Bet big, nuke him, make him make some big folds, and that's how that spot's going to work. And you can see the big wins for, pocket twos and threes betting and getting all these folds from nines and all this stuff. Now, again, we want to track what are the worst hands that he calls. We already said in the other video, playing out of position, that the notable folds are here. Then, if we think about every turn card in the deck, and we put up, all right, we can see we're really, as the in position player, looking for low cards, right? Because those are not improvement cards for our out of position check call range. The high cards are bad for us. The low cards tend to be good because they're bricks for OOP. We retain all of our equity with whatever our strong hands were. And we're putting in money for a big size. We're remaining polar throughout this hand, right? It's not like we just started nuking the flop and now we're going to started doing a bunch of crazy value betting on the turn. And when we get a brick, it's really good for us as we track OOP's calling range. They still have stuff like, kings, jacks, 10x backdoor, or sorry, 10x flush draw, maybe a little bit of, obviously the jack 10. So we've got this brick where we're going to play a pot size bet or a medium size bet. And we're going to get folds from jack 10, king 10, ace 8, ace 9. So the low cards are really good for us to target those ace X that are unimproved. And we have those, queen or 10 plus gutter or plus backdoor that have to end up folding the turn. So that's why we're going to use these low pocket pairs, irrelevant, some low card here, flush draws, some jack X, jack 9, stuff like that. So whole point is understanding those flop mechanics, understanding how to put it in play on the turn. Obviously our number one choices here are king X, jack X, stuff like that. Last one. All right, what does it mean when somebody misses a c-bet on this board where they're supposed to be nuking us because they just have us a hammer lock with all their overpairs? They have 8x offsuit that we don't have. They have 9x offsuit that we don't have, and they miss a c-bet. Well, versus a lot of players, if they miss the c-bet, it doesn't mean too much because they're probably not going to play this strategy. But at equilibrium, it means that we'll jack up our frequency, right? So this is an example. This is an example of a board where when check to, if somebody knows what they're doing, they probably don't have a lot of their strong hands. We can have the most aggressive small bet that we've seen in this spot and just try to target some of those bad high cards. King Jack, King 10, King Queen, Queen 7, whatever the case may be, right? So always, what am I targeting? What does it mean when they miss the c-bet? Where am I starting here with my bets? These are just value bets, right? We're not really starting to bluff, but we are building, again, if you take away one thing from these boards, how aggressive we are with our offsuit stuff. We really need this stuff because otherwise the suited stuff, the pairs, they don't always make for great bluffs. They just don't make up enough hands. Then we're not getting the aggression that we need. And everything that we've been talking about is making sure that we find aggression every spot that we need to, right? So making sure that we start with all this high stuff is really important, and that, you're getting those ace queen, ace jack kind of hard bets because your out of position player is not check raising you 20%. So those bets are overperforming. You might end up checking too often, letting them catch up or letting them get a chance to bluff, and then you overfold a big chunk of equity. Let's just get good at playing these flops kind of how we're supposed to, and then we tailor our strategies as we get to turns and rivers versus different players to, like I said, I want to be really, really good at flop and turn mechanics and then take over on the river and just use my poker brain at that point, right? That's what the point of all of these flop and turn mechanics are. So understanding, where this call range is versus a person, it's going to be really realistic. They're going to have the high cards. They're going to have some backdoors. They're going to have the queen 10. They're going to under check raise. So if we look at what we do on every turn card, we're seeing a pretty common mechanic here, right? Except for the ace queen 10 where the board was extremely good for out of position. When we miss these c-bets on some of these other boards, or when out of position misses a c-bet, in position we put our small bet out, we get called. We were small betting somewhere in the region of 50-55% of the time. When check to, we're putting in money about 60% of the time on a lot of these different boards, right? So even if you just went 50-50, you'd be doing a pretty good job at understanding how often you're supposed to be putting in money. And it's usually going in our medium size because we're trying to target high card misses. So, and maybe some gutters. So this, and a lot of these turn cards in this spot are playing pretty equal frequency, right? And we understand that the high card, the ace high, is really always the worst for us as the in position player. And the Broadway high cards are pretty good if we have that aggression with the Broadways. So if we put up one of our more aggressive turn cards here, we love the brick as in position because we can continue value betting our pocket pairs. We can continue targeting out of positions high cards. We go into a medium big size or a big size, and even versus the B66 or so, we're really just looking to track that offsuit combos he called with. What do I want to make him fold with? So we can see here that we kind of love using our random king 7 is the hardest bluff. Stuff like that, where we're going to be able to bluff on some straight completing runouts. We clear out the hands that dominate us, but we can also go high up and try to make him fold a bunch of his ace highs as well. Stuff like king 10, trying to make him fold king queen. All the same rules, all the same ideas. Just get good at applying all these ideas to different spots.